This is Nathan Fantasy Football League Updates. Today, we introduce the number 2 team in the Nathan Fantasy Football League preseason polls. We're going to get you their squad, give you their final outlook, and get you how they can win the championship. All that and more next. Nathan, Fantasy Football League Updates, welcome to one of the final videos in my preseason Fantasy Football League rankings. We are here with the number 2 team, which means after today, we will know the number 1 team. We are down to 2, and as always, if you haven't seen the videos before this, I highly recommend you go check those out. We've already ranked 8 of the other 10 teams in our 2QB, PPR, and Punter Fantasy Football League. Now remember, 6 teams make it into the playoffs, so these final 2 teams are honestly my favorite teams to win the championship, and I am between the Michigan Avengers and the Brisbane Bay Bandicoots. That is right. One of these 2 teams we will go through today. The other, the number 1 preseason team, we will announce them tomorrow. So as always, we've already revealed the teams before this. Let's quickly take you through those rankings. Clocking in at number 10 was the Rocky River Rough Riders, followed by the Bay City Bunnies, then the Grand Rapids Groundhogs, the Zest Meisters, the Guantanamo Bay Flying Squirrels, the Iguanas, the Bowling Green Cave Shrimp, and just yesterday we revealed the Empire Strikes Back as the number 3 team in the league. So don't forget, before we announce the number 2 team, to like and subscribe and comment down below. Do you agree with this take? Do you think this team should have been number 1, or do you think this team should be a little bit lower down? But let's waste no more time. The number 2 team in the Fantasy Football League polls is the Brisbane Bay Bandicoots. That's right. The Brisbane Bay Bandicoots are my number 2 team in the Fantasy Football League preseason poll, meaning tomorrow we will take you through the Michigan Avengers. That is right. So let's waste no more time. Let's introduce our number 2 team, the Brisbane Bay Bandicoots. And this is a team that every year gets ranked pretty high, but the results aren't really there. They finish either a game out of the playoffs or finish as the 6th seed just sneaking in. There's no in between. They really have snuck into the playoffs and then lost first round, or they miss it and they're battling in the losers bracket. So this is a team that every year gets hyped up, but there's no in between. They either slightly make it in or they miss out. So is this the year for the Brisbane Bay Bandicoots? Let's find out if they can put it together by meeting their team. The quarterback room, honestly, one of the more sound and well-rounded quarterback rooms. They cover a lot of different areas, and they're QB1. Before we mention the quarterbacks, actually, I forgot to mention, they picked at number 7 overall. They traded their 2nd round pick to the Groundhogs, who ended up trading that around, and they ended up securing 2 3rd round picks and some other picks down the board. So no 2nd round pick, but they picked at number 7 and then the 3rd round. And they went out and got a quarterback in that 3rd round. They went out and drafted Jordan Love for the Green Bay Packers, will be the quarterback 1 for the Brisbane Bay Bandicoots, and I don't mind it. He's a guy that obviously finished strong last year, and obviously in his first full season of starting, he looked solid, a good fantasy option. He's got a decent receiving core, but I'm a little worried about Josh Jacobs being in the building now because he might take a little bit more of the passing attempts away from Jordan Love. But nonetheless, I think, he's a good fantasy quarterback. He'll get you those passing touchdowns. The rushing upside isn't really there with Jordan Love a ton. He'll get a little bit of rushing attack room, but not too much. But nonetheless, I don't mind Jordan Love with the arm ability. And then you back it up. You kind of take what Jordan Love isn't, a rushing quarterback in Kyler Murray. This is a guy that I started to become really high on as, more and more news came out. And as I got a lot of hype for Kyler Murray, I ended up going in a different direction with Dak Prescott. But still, Kyler Murray, a phenomenal rushing quarterback. He is phenomenal. He's going to get you great rushing points, and especially because I think he's going to be on the run, a lot more this season. And the Bandicoots will love that. It's the matter of fact that Kyler Murray, every healthy season or every stretch of a healthy season he's been a top 5 fantasy quarterback. So as long as Kyler Murray stays healthy and there's no new Call of Duty, you're going to have a great quarterback on your roster in Kyler Murray, who is going to be a top 5 fantasy football quarterback with that great rushing upside and a good throwing ability. So the quarterback room, no problems there. We move on to the running back room. And with the number 7 overall pick, they got a player that was drastically falling because of the wide receiver push in the beginning of the round, and that was Bijan Robinson. That's right, Bijan Robinson is a member of the Brisbane Bay Bandicoots. Still getting used to that, as they were called the Big Brain Bandicoots, or previously the Bears, or other bee animals, as you get the drift. But now they are the Brisbane Bay Bandicoots. But nonetheless, they get Bijan Robinson, who we know didn't have a great fantasy football season last year. He didn't really get the rock as ton as we thought. He's got great receiving upside and a new offensive coordinator that we think is going to just hand him the ball, let him be the offense. So I like the pick of Bijan Robinson. Obviously, last season we saw some potential, but didn't get enough carries to do 20-plus multiple weeks. So Bijan Robinson, I have high faith. He'll have a better season this season. Is it the fantasy season we hope for? I don't know yet, because we have to see the Atlanta offense in effect. But nonetheless, I think Bijan Robinson is a solid pickup as your number 1 overall player. I know you were in the market for Justin Jefferson, but a pick before you, he was taken. So you settled for Bijan Robinson, and I don't mind it. He's better, in my opinion, than Breece Hall and the risk you take with Breece Hall. But Bijan Robinson, a solid pickup. And then you get a player that was falling in the 3rd round. He fell out of the 2nd round into the 3rd round, and that's Kyren Williams. You ended up snagging Kyren Williams with your first pick in the 3rd round, and honestly, that's a steal of a pick. Kyren Williams, an incredible running back, and obviously there's some speculation that Blake Corum will be taking some of his snaps. I don't really see that. We kind of talked about that in the Zestmeister video, where even if he takes a little bit of the snaps, we saw Kyren Williams with less than 75% snap production still produce 150-yard games. I'm not worried at all. Kyren Williams is the guy in LA. He's going to get plenty of touches. He's a great receiving back as well. This is an incredible pickup, and honestly, one of the best running back rooms in the league, rivaling that of the Bowling Green Cave Shrimp. So, a good 1-2 punch in the running back room. And then the wide receiving room is kind of where I have questions and what kind of landed you at the number 2 spot. You kind of went running back heavy, and that kind of hurt you with the wide receivers. Your wide receiver 1, though, I don't really mind. It's Davante Adams. Obviously, we know the situation in Las Vegas is not exceptional. And we know either Gardner Minshew or Aiden O'Connell's throwing to him. If I'm a Davante Adams fantasy owner, I'm hoping it's a little bit more of Gardner Minshew. But nonetheless, Davante Adams last season was very up and down. He'd have 6 fantasy points one week, and then he'd have 25 the next when the Raiders actually decided to target him. I don't really know what to think of Davante Adams, especially because we know he's an incredible wide receiver, but it depends on if the Raiders can get him the football. He also has competition with now Brock Bowers. We have Myers still in the building and Mayer in the building. So some competition there. And as long as the Raiders get him the ball, he's a phenomenal wide receiver. As long as they can consistently get him those 7 to 8 targets a game, he's a viable wide receiver 1. But with Davante Adams, I think you're going to have a fair share of up and down weeks, and it'll be a rocky road, and I'm sure you're going to, have weeks where you're like, why did I draft this guy? And some weeks where you're like, this is why I drafted that guy. But with Davante Adams, this is one of the biggest roller coaster players in the league for sure. And then your wide receiver 2, I'm completely out on. I think you need to already go and search for a new wide receiver 2. It's Malik Neighbors from the New York Giants. the Giants do not produce fantasy football wide receivers. I get Malik Neighbors, the number 6 overall pick. He's an incredible player, but he's playing on the New York Giants with Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones is by far one of the worst starting quarterbacks, and no Giants receiver has even been near the top 30 in almost a decade. Really, it's been terrible. I shouldn't say a decade, but at least the past 5 seasons, Malik Neighbors might be an exception, but I don't think so. I think the Giants suck at getting receivers the football. They've drafted rookies almost every year, and they haven't produced at all. And Malik Neighbors might be the exception here, but I don't think so. I think he's going to fail to be any use for fantasy football. He might get a week where he's worth, a 20-point piece or 14 to 13 points. I think it's just going to be so bad in New York. This is going to be one of the worst football teams in the league. And Malik Neighbors is going to hate it there. He's going to, targets wavering. I think this is a terrible option for wide receiver too. And this is also ultimately what weighs you down. So we move on to your tight end position. And you went out and got Evan Ingram. Evan Ingram was phenomenal down the stretch. You couldn't stop this guy from getting 20-point games down the stretch, and he was incredible. And once again, I think he'll be a fine tight end. I think he'll be consistent in the part of the games where you won't really have to worry about looking for another tight end, but you won't have that incredible upside value that you have with Mark Andrews and Travis Kelce and Sam Laporta. I think Evan Ingram is more of a 10 to 13 points a game, which is perfectly fine for the tight end position. Obviously, he'll be good for a couple 20 pieces a week once in a while, but I also don't think he's going to have the kind of production he finished with last year, especially because Gabe Davis, Brian Thomas Jr., and Christian Kirk are all still in the building. Even Travis Etienne will be taking some of those targets. Evan Ingram targeted a little bit more near the red zone, which will help, but still, I think there's too much moving pieces and a lot of options there in Jacksonville that Evan Ingram might get a little bit more forgotten about to begin the season. If injuries happen, I think Evan Ingram's role will increase, but nonetheless, I think there are some question marks there with him, but I don't mind the pick. I think he'll be a consistent tight end. Then we move on to your flex position, and I kind of mentioned you went running back heavy, and you picked up a third running back at your flex, rivaling that of what the Bowling Green Cave Shrimp did, and you went out and grabbed Joe Mixon. Don't mind Joe Mixon at all. Obviously, in a new offense in the Houston Texans, we know he's got great receiving back upside out of the backfield. Obviously, we're kind of speculating, is Dameon Pierce kind of just out of the rotation? Do we have to worry about him taking snaps? We don't really know with Joe Mixon and Dameon Pierce. We know Pierce had an incredible rookie year and then kind of died off with Devin Singletary last year, and now Joe Mixon's in the building. You've got to expect Joe Mixon will be the head back, but obviously Dameon Pierce could steal a lot of those red zone targets, or rather rushing attempts in the red zone as more of a power back. But nonetheless, I like the pickup of Joe Mixon. Good receiving upside. He'll get plenty of touches. Obviously, he's got to compete in the receiving game with a stacked receiving corps. But overall, he's the main guy in Houston for the rushing attack. And I don't mind that pick for a flex option. So the running back room, honestly, like I said, top 2 in the league. It's either the Brisbane Bay Bandicoots or the Bowling Green Cave Shrimp. And let me know in the comments below, do you think Bowling Green Cave Shrimp have the better rushing room in Jonathan Taylor, Josh Jacobs, and Isaiah Pacheco? Or is it the Bandicoots with Bijan Robinson, Kyron Williams, and Joe Mixon? So now we move to the special teams. It's the Cleveland Browns defense leading things off. Honestly, one of the top 3 defenses in the league. You won't really have to be a waiver wire warrior. This is a squad that used to be a waiver wire warrior in the sense that they would have to pick up a defense every week. Now they last season went with a consistent defense and loved it. So now they get the Cleveland Browns defense to lock things up. Then they go kicker in Evan McPherson for the Cincinnati Bengals, a solid kicker. This will be a team that, eventually the offense will stall out. He'll get some good field goal attempts up and get those extra points from how often this offense is scoring. And then finally, your staple player in your punter every year. This is a staple player. I believe this punter went in the 15th round of our draft. It's Michael Dixon for the Seattle Seahawks. This is a legendary punter for this fantasy league and is always a member of this Bandicoots squad. Something I'd also like to mention as we move to the bench with this Bandicoot squad, nonetheless being known for all of their waiver wire warrior pickups. They got Puka Nacua last year off the waiver wires. They have had injury problems. Once in a while, you'll hear me refer to them as the Big Brain Band-Aids, or now the Brisbane Bay Band-Aids, because of how injury prone they were last year. They had so many injuries, and it was a rough go for them. So now let's look at the bench for this squad, and they go out and will lead off their bench with a quarterback 3. It's Geno Smith from the Seattle Seahawks. Obviously, we know Geno Smith has been kind of battling with Sam Howell, but I've heard Sam Howell's been kind of rough in training camp, so I don't think Geno Smith's job is in jeopardy, but still keep an eye on that. Obviously, a little bit older, so the wear and tear might be there a little bit more. If he goes down, that could be a rough set at a rough point, but nonetheless, I don't mind Geno Smith. He's got incredible options. He's a steady quarterback. He'll get you those 14 to 15 points if you need him to clock in a week, or he can even reach for that 20-point week. It's a solid quarterback 3. Then we move on to another Seattle Seahawks player. It's Jackson Smith-Njigba, who last season didn't have a breakout year fantasy football-wise. A lot of people thought he would as the first wide receiver off the board. Nonetheless, he was solid, and this year I'm pretty sure he's been promoted to that wide receiver 2 position behind DK Metcalf, and Tyler Lockett is now considered the third-string wide receiver. So that's more targets for Smith-Njigba, and JSN will, I think, be a little bit more involved with a new coach in the building, and they're going to get him the football either in the slot or on the outside. I think this is a great pickup. I think he's due for probably a more improved season. So this is a guy that you can even play, hopefully, at that wide receiver 2 position over Malik Nabers or a flex option. Then we move down the board, your next running back. So technically the 4th-string running back, honestly, this could be a 3rd string on some of the other teams. It's Devin Singletary. We kind of talked about it with Joe Mixon. He moves over to the New York Giants, which their offense is going to suck. He's the lead back in New York. I think Devin Singletary will take advantage of that. He's a great receiving threat out of the backfield, and we know Danny Dimes loves to check it down. So Devin Singletary will get you great points there if he even plays with how good your running backs are, and he's a great rushing upside. We saw what he did with the Texans last season. He was a viable option down the stretch. Looking down the board, you go with a risky pick, but like I said, everybody needs a risky pick, and I feel like that's exactly what you did here with Xavier Worthy, the 1st-round pick out of Texas for the Kansas City Chiefs. Xavier Worthy has been deemed one of the fastest players ever to be drafted outside of Tyreek Hill, and this guy's going to an offense that just, recently in the past 3 years have gotten rid of Tyreek Hill. They know how to use a speedy receiver, and here's Xavier Worthy ready to go. I think Xavier Worthy will be great, obviously considered the 3rd option behind Rashee Rice, and then Hollywood Brown in that room, and then technically also behind Travis Kelce. But still, this is a guy that's going to start to develop this year, and obviously he'll have some breakout games. I think he's a huge deep threat for this Chiefs offense, especially with the cannon of Patrick Mahomes. This will be a great risky pick, because if he pans out, great. If he doesn't, it's fine. I know you need wide receiver, in my opinion, so you'd like him more to break out, but still, it's a fine risky pick at your wide receiver 4. Then you go another receiver in Curtis Samuel, who is set to be the technical number 1 option in Buffalo. It's Dalton Kincaid, Keon Coleman, and then Curtis Samuel is considered the technical top wide receiver 1 in the Bills offense. We'll see if he can kind of fill the void Stephon Diggs or Gabe Davis was filling. Josh Allen, I think, is going to be running a lot more, and James Cook will be running the ball a lot more. So I think he'll be a viable option. I think maybe he'll end up becoming that wide receiver 2, because the Bills have to throw to somebody, and if it's not Keon Coleman or Dalton Kincaid, I think it's going to be Curtis Samuel, and he'll make good do a reliable wide receiver. 2 more players to go, and they're both wide receivers. You go out and get the other Raiders wide receiver. It's Jacoby Myers, who had surprisingly an incredible fantasy season last year. He ate up touchdowns for the Las Vegas Raiders. Will he do that again this year? I don't think he'll have the same production he does. I think he'll have some solid games, some not so solid games. Like I said, you got to hope Devontae Adams kind of takes a little bit from Jacoby Myers on your squad, which you're fine with because you have both Raiders receivers. But Jacoby Myers, if he, continues to be consistent and be a great option for the Raiders like he was last year, this could be a viable receiver you use as well. And rounding out your lineup, it's the number 1 receiver technically for the LA Chargers. It's Joshua Palmer. We know how the Chargers receiving room is. We'll see how it shapes out. We know new coach in the building in Harbaugh, they're going to want to run the rock, but I think Palmer's technically considered the number 1 option. Him, Ladd McConkey, I know DJ Chark's there, and of course, Quentin Johnston. But I think Joshua Palmer, technically as the veteran in that room, will be getting more of the receptions going down, and they'll try to scheme him in. But nonetheless, it's an okay pick. He's pretty buried on the bench, but if it pans out, it pans out. So that is the Brisbane Bay Bandicoots roster. So we've taken you through that. They are a member of the NFC, and let's get you those predictions. So as a part of the NFC, this is going to be a team that, plays in a tough division. They're going to play with the likes of the Iguanas, the Flying Squirrels, and the Empire Strikes Back. All teams, I think, that make the playoffs. So, where does my prediction stand them at? Well, I'm going to have some optimism for this team this season. They've been up and down, but nonetheless, I think this is a team that if everything goes right, they play up to par. Well, if they play up to par, but, injuries will happen, and if Bijan Robinson doesn't really pan out to be a number one overall pick-worthy guy, obviously the wide receiver room, Devontae Adams, struggles. Malik Neighbors is exactly who I think he is another addition of the Giants' fantasy wide receivers. Evan Ingram doesn't play great. Kyler Murray deals with injuries. Things don't go great, and you can't find options to replace them. I think this will be an up and down season. The floor for this team, 6-8. But I still think that's a solid floor. You'd obviously miss the playoffs with that 6-8 record. Again, just on the cusp of it, but still a good up and down competitive season. On the flip side of things, if Bijan Robinson becomes the greatest running back in the draft and, your quarterbacks stay healthy, Kyron Williams is a steal. Devontae Adams returns to Packers form. We could even see a Devontae Adams trade that works in your favor. Malik Neighbors turns out to be an incredible wide receiving option. Joe Mixon's back to form. Maybe Xavier Worthy pans out. Some of these guys, this team explodes. This team has a high ceiling of 12-2. This could be a incredible team if things work out in that wide receiver room. Really proves me wrong. Now we meet in the middle. I think, you've got such a high ceiling and a pretty high floor. It's a solid floor, and you've got to feel like one time this Bandicoots team has to pull through and finally avoid that just cusp of the playoffs thing. You're playing in a tough division. I know there'll be weeks where, you're playing, technically, in my opinion, 4 teams that are going to make the playoffs and one that isn't. I think you'll have a go of things with the Bandicoots. And because of that, I think, some weeks your team will work out. I think that receiving room, some weeks it'll work out, and those will be some solid winning weeks. Other weeks it won't, and the team's going to either have to pull together to try to get you over the hump outside of the receiving room, which I think your team is very capable of doing, or this team crumbles. And I think there'll be some solid ups, some low lows. As always, I think this team has some risk of injuries, especially in that of Kyler Murray. Even Bijan Robinson could be a little bit injury prone. But I will give the Bandicoots a final prediction of 9-5. That's right. This is a Bandicoots team that I could see finishing the season as the number 2 seed at a 9-5 record and winning the NFC division. I think this is a team that obviously you've got great quarterback room, an excellent running back room, and then the receiving room's got a lot to prove for me. I think the special teams is great, and the bench depth is very solid. You kind of covered the wide receiver hole, in my opinion, well, with plenty of receivers that have possibilities to break out. So that will conclude our take on the champion, in my opinion, of the NFC, the Brisbane Bay Bandicoots. Now, tomorrow, we will reveal the number 1 team and take you through the reigning champs, the Michigan Avengers, who clock in as the preseason favorites at number 1. We'll do that tomorrow. Let me know in the comments below what you think of the Brisbane Bay Bandicoots. Do you agree? Do you disagree? What do you think of this take? Let me know in the comments below. And until next time, we'll see you real soon with more updates on the Nathan Fantasy Football League Network.